5%, 10%, rising up. Oh. We're live, right?
Yeah, I think we can go ahead.
Hi, everyone. This is Lean Experiments with Lean Expectations, a ProductCamp Cascadia 2021 talk. Build it and they will come. Well, we built it and they didn't come. A couple of years ago, I worked on a new module with one of the best developers in the company for 4 entire months. We didn't validate the idea before because we didn't know any better. It was about 4 years ago, as I mentioned. In the end, it wasn't what the customer wanted. Another team had to further adapt it for the customer after we had worked on it, and it was pretty devastating for me to go through that. So what's the alternative if you can't just build your vision and see if it works? My name is Ena Sesardic, and today I'm going to show you the alternative, Lean Experiments with Lean Expectations. What you'll get out of this talk is how to build less of the wrong product by running lean experiments. I'll show you 4 types of lean experiments through 5 real-life examples. I'm going to talk to you about the importance of lean expectations and staying objective, and then finally, when to walk away from an idea. So a little background about me. So my name is Ena Sesardic. I have 7 years startup and startup-like teams experience. 3.5 of those years were spent as a product manager. I scaled a brand new fintech application in the fintech industry for a couple of years. Then I ran an innovation team as a product manager. About a year ago, I ended up actually leaving my job to experiment with my own ideas and figure out my next career step. I also mentor and advise venture teams through a startup accelerator here at UBC in Vancouver, the university. I also write on my blog, lenasesardic.com, and I contribute some of my writings to Product Coalition and the Startup, 2 large medium publications. So the mindset that I want you to get into is think in experiments, not products. Think about what is the quickest way that I can test whether this idea will work? What are my riskiest assumptions? What one thing has to be true for the whole idea to fall apart? What is my hypothesis? Remember, make sure that you're specific, measurable, disprovable, and time-bound with your hypotheses. What outcome am I expecting? Be specific. List your measurable outcomes, write them down, because you're going to have to stay accountable to what you initially set out to test. Ultimately, how can you save time by not building the wrong products? If you think about startups, for example, they're really just a race to solve the right problem before running out of money. So to stay objective and accountable, what I recommend you do is divorce yourself from your idea. Remember that 9 out of 10 startups fail. Even more product features fail. And this means, most importantly, that most experiments will fail. And it's your job to learn as quickly as possible through these failed experiments so you can spend as little time as possible on the wrong things. A mentor once said to me, your idea is the best thing since sliced bread until it's not. And what he was trying to tell me is believe in your idea up until the moment that the data tells you otherwise. Move fast, fail fast. So what are lean experiments? They should really only take a few days or a few weeks to run. They're designed to test a very specific hypothesis. And the quantitative and/or qualitative feedback that you get as a result will inform whether you're on the right track or whether you should pivot the idea or even abandon it. Lean experiments also prioritize learning. The only real failure is failing to learn. If you learn something from an experiment, it was a success. And we need to value these failed experiments so that they can help us invalidate our ideas more. It's literally money and time saved, which extends our runway. So the first lean experiment that I'm going to talk to you about today is the Wizard of Oz method. And what that is it's when humans simulate a functioning product without the use of technology and without the user's knowledge that there's no technology involved behind the scenes. So our first real life example is from a company called Veni. So they're a team that I mentor through the Startup Accelerator here at UBC. And what they did is they used the Wizard of Oz method to test whether there's an opportunity to create a meal delivery service that focuses on batching meal orders for restaurants to help them save money on ingredients and labor. So the first thing that they did is they set up a very simple landing page for customers to submit their orders through. The idea is that you submit your orders a few days or a week in advance, and you can select which menu items you want and which day that you would like to have that meal. The next thing they did, and this is where the Wizard of Oz method is in action, is on the days where they had meals that needed to be delivered that were pre-ordered from the website, they amalgamated all the orders from the website manually, and then they would pick up the phone and call each restaurant and tell them what the orders were for that day. When it came time to delivering the meals, which was usually between 5 to 7 p.m. every evening, they would go to the restaurants with their own cars or with a bus, pick up the meals themselves and deliver them to the customers. So everything was done manually by the founding team. There was no technology that transferred the orders from the website to the restaurants. There were no drivers that they hired. They just did this all behind the scenes like the Wizard of Oz. And the results are pretty remarkable. So they had only spent $25, but they have managed to validate that batching meal orders is valuable to restaurants. It does save them money and time, and they value this quite a lot. They also collected a lot of feedback on the customer experience. So every time they were interacting with the restaurants, every time they were interacting with the customers who'd ordered the meals, they could get additional feedback on what it is that the customers wanted and what worked for the restaurants. So what they decided to do going forward is instead of actually building out any further technology beyond the website, they decided to continue using the Wizard of Oz method to basically keep testing the riskiest assumption, which is what does the customer want and is this going to be viable from the customer's perspective, the person ordering the meals. And instead they chose to install some analytics on their landing page, but they're actually, as we're talking right now, they're continuing to use the Wizard of Oz method to further validate their idea. So to summarize, I want to talk a little about the pros and cons of the Wizard of Oz method. So the first advantage is that you don't need to build any technology. So as I mentioned, all they did was build a quick website, and they did the whole service on their own behind the scenes manually, which makes it really quick to ship. You just have to decide on how you're going to provide the experience behind the scenes, and you can start doing that relatively quickly. So this team was up and running in about 2 weeks of planning. The high-touch service is a learning opportunity. So as I mentioned, every time that they're talking with these restaurants, they're making the meal deliveries, this is high-touch service that helps them learn a lot about what is the problem that they're solving and how can they best create a solution for it. Lastly, it's really easy to pivot. So let's say, for example, one day they decide that they want to do their deliveries between 8 and 9 p.m. to see if that was better for customers. They can easily decide to do that the next day and manually deliver the meals in that time frame instead. So it's really easy to keep tweaking your approach to further validate what is the best customer experience. The cons are that it does require manual work. So as we can see in the case of Veni, they were manually, calling up these restaurants, doing the deliveries. It requires some manual work. You do have to build the product eventually, of course, if you do need to build technology down the line. Sometimes they may not be polished. If humans are providing the service, there might be delays or the experience might not be as polished as it would be through a full technology solution. And finally, sometimes the Wizard of Oz is not the best approach or even realistic for all possible product concepts. So the second lean experiment I want to talk to you about today is the fake door demand test. What the fake door demand test is, it's when it's based on the premise that people are bad at predicting what they want, but they're great at reacting to existing offers. So it's when you actually fake the existence of a product and measure the actions users take. So one example would be, a very simple example is a landing page. It's sort of like a fake door. You put up a landing page, show that the product exists, and you basically test how people behave with respect to that landing page. It could also be a button within an existing product to test whether that additional feature would be welcome to customers. So the real life example that I want to show you for the fake door demand test is from a company called Kettle and Fire that was founded by a person called Justin Morris. He's also the author of a very famous book called Traction with his friend Gabriel, forget his last name all the time, but really good book on distribution strategies. So he started a company that produced bone broth online. So e-commerce company that does bone broth. So Justin Mars at the time was in a CrossFit community. He was starting to hear a lot about people talking about bone broth and wanting to create bone broth and how the health benefits are really good for the CrossFit community. So he had an inkling that there might be an opportunity for him to take advantage of this trend, especially because there wasn't really anywhere to buy bone broth at the time. So he did a quick keyword search and trend analysis to see, are people searching for bone broth? Are they searching more for bone broth these days? And as you can see in the graph, he saw that around 2015, it was dramatically increasing the number of people that were looking up bone broth on Google. So this was kind of the first really validation point that there might be something here. So he decided to run another lean experiment. So the next step was he set up a very simple landing page with a button that said order bone broth now. And he paid $50 to Bing to run some ads to drive traffic to the landing page. Very simple landing page, just a little bit of information about the benefits of bone broth, nothing fancy, an image of what the package might look like, and right away, order it now. So when people clicked this order bone broth now button, they were actually redirected to a page that asked them to PayPal $29.99 to Justin Mara's Gmail address. And surprisingly, the results were pretty amazing. So what he found was, out of over 7,000 people that had access to his website based on the ads that he was running, over 2,000 of them converted and bought the bone broth, as in they clicked on the button and PayPal'd him the $29.99 to his Gmail address. That's a 30% conversion rate, which is very, very good. So he got some excellent results. And this was basically the basis of him validating the idea of building this company around bone broth. So now the next thing he had to do was source the bone broth and actually start the company. But this was a really great way for him to do a really lean experiment to test, is this worth building a company around? And is it worth sourcing the product even? And so the question remains, though, how did he deal in the moment with not having the bone broth at this time? So he has over 2,000 people that have converted. How did he deal with the fact that he had no inventory? And the answer is good old-fashioned customer service. So what he did was he simply sent an out-of-stock follow-up email to the people that had transferred him the money. He said, "Hi, I'm the founder of Bone Broths Co. Thanks for ordering. Unfortunately, we don't have any stock right now. I'm happy to refund you, or I can give you a 50% discount and we'll ship in a couple weeks." And apparently there were not really any upset customers, and virtually all of them went for the 50% discount. And then he quickly kind of got his ducks in a row, sourced the bone broth and started selling it. And it became a very successful company. So a very successful experiment. The next example that I want to show you is from a company called CustomerCamp. So I was actually on the CustomerCamp website a couple weeks ago. They described, because I started following the founder on Twitter, Caitlin Borgon, and they describe themselves as a training and research firm that helps product teams get inside the customers' heads so they can market smarter and understand why customers buy. So I was scanning through the website, and the first thing that I noticed was on the nav bar, she had a button that said Get Certified. And I've been in the customer discovery space for a while. I test my own ideas, as I mentioned. I mentor a lot of teams. I do a little bit of consulting. And so I was really interested to hear, what is this certification? Maybe this is something that could benefit me. I would be interested in something like this. And so I clicked on it. And what happened when I clicked on it was I was redirected to a waitlist pop-up. And it basically it told me essentially, people ask us about a certification. We don't have one yet. We're working on it. Sign up to get on the wait list. And so I put my name and email in and didn't really think much about it. What happened a couple days later is I got an email directly from Caitlin herself asking me if I was open to jumping on a 30-minute customer discovery call. I agreed, and we had a really nice 30-minute chat, and she asked me all about, what was going on in my life that I was interested in looking up the certification, what are my motivations around customer discovery, what would my expectations be if there were to be a certification, what have I tried, what was missing out of these existing solutions, all that type of good stuff that you get out of customer discovery. So a lot of qualitative feedback that she could then use to further inform her strategy around creating the certification program. So the results were, first of all, the quantitative data. So all the people that had signed up to the wait list, that was an indicator of who might be interested in that sort of certification. And the key here is that she didn't just put the wait list on her website, she put a fake door, which is the Get Certified button, and then once people clicked on it, these are sort of people that are actually self-selecting as interested in a certification like that. And then she collected their information. So these are kind of closer to potential customers, potential paying customers for that certification. The next thing is the customer discovery interviews. As I mentioned, she was doing them with interested parties, and she got a lot of great qualitative feedback to further inform how she can develop the certification program. And really the qualitative data is where she got these deep insights and really understanding the customer pain points, me being the customer. And lastly, she actually created a lot of good connections with potential future customers. So like myself, we had a really great chat. And now that I feel more connected with her and I really like the way she explained the certification, I'm probably a lot more interested to hear about the certification because I really like her and I like the company. So this further helps with her acquisition down the line. But at the end of the day, the point here is that she is running quite a lean experiment to test whether the certification is something what people want and in what format. So to summarize the fake door demand test method, the first advantage is that it's quick to ship in terms of a landing page or a button. So it's relatively quickly to throw up a landing page. You can, depending on your product, but you can usually easily add a button, or like Caitlin, you can just add it to the website. There's no need to source or create the product, so she hasn't even started creating the certification program. Justin Mars did not create his product before he ran his lean experiments. Don't need to create the product right out the gate. Finally, you get quantitative and qualitative data that you can use for analysis to help inform what you should do and whether you should continue working on this opportunity. And then lastly, it can be very scalable, especially in the case of a landing page or a button added to your website. The customer interviews that Caitlin was doing obviously are not as scalable as just a landing page, but that was an addition that she decided to add to her lean experiment. Finally, the disadvantages is that paid ads are pretty expensive depending on the platform, and they're actually getting more and more expensive these days. They also require a lot of expertise as they become pretty complicated. So you need to know what you're doing in order to run successful ads and get some good conversions and not get false negatives just because your ad strategy is not or you're not spending as much as you need to get those results. Secondly, if you're using too many fake doors, I was going to say trap doors, I guess they're sort of like trap doors. If you're using too many fake doors, it might turn into potentially frustrated customers. So the advice is usually to use them sparingly. Although, as I was researching for this presentation, I learned that apparently companies like Zynga do a lot of fake doors for their products. So if it's done well, you can definitely get away with it, but just something to kind of keep in mind of. Lastly, it's also relatively easy to get false negatives due to poor UX on your landing page or within the product if you're doing that fake door button style thing. The ad copy is also very, very important. If you don't have good ad copy, that could lead to false negatives. And then finally, the choice of ad platform. If you've picked a platform that is not the right place for your audience, that might skew your results as well. So these are just some things to be aware of when you're running a fake door demand test. The third lean experiment that I want to talk about today is the cold outreach method. So cold outreach is when you contact people who haven't previously expressed an interest in the product or service that you're offering. This could be cold emails, it could be cold calling, and there's many ways to do the cold outreach. You could include a value proposition of the service or product that you're offering. You could include a mock-up of the product that you're hoping to create, or even a clickable prototype. So it depends on what stage you're at and how you want to approach the cold outreach. But the key thing to remember here is it requires a large volume because cold outreach at the end of the day is a numbers game. The average response rate for a cold email is less than 5%. So you need to really send out a lot. You need to do a lot of cold outreach to get the right results. So don't be discouraged if you send five cold emails and you don't get a reply. Doesn't mean that your idea sucks. It might just be you need to literally just contact a lot more people. So the real life example that I'm going to show you for the cold outreach method is Scheduling App X. The reason it's called Scheduling App X is because it's actually a product that one of my friends is working on. He's building a company around a new scheduling app that is going to compete with a lot of the other scheduling apps out there. And I really like how he used cold outreach to validate his idea. So the very first thing that he did is he created a clickable prototype of what the app would or might look like. I believe for him, he actually paid someone on Fiverr to create the prototype really nicely for him, but you can always throw up a prototype using Figma, Balsamic, Adobe XD. There's tons of tools out there that are relatively easy to throw up a clickable prototype in, including Sketch, I think. The next step, this is where the cold outreach comes in, is he collected 100 or more leads from 5 different niche industries that he thought might be the most interested in his scheduling app to begin with. So he found 100 plus leads in the appliance repair space, carpet cleaning niche, plumbing niche, landscaping, and painting. So 5 niche industries. And I believe, again, for his example, he went on Upwork and found these leads. He paid for them, I think around $1 a lead, but you can, of course, source them on your own as well. The third step is he sent out these 5 cold email campaigns. So each email campaign went to the different niche industry. And so what he mentioned in the email, he included a clickable prototype, and the gist of the email was, this is what your website could look like with my scheduling app. So it was pretty compelling. It looked really nice, and you could see what the value would be of his product on their website. And the results were pretty good. So he first identified the 2 niche industries that had the highest demand, which was carpet cleaning and painting. So in terms of the data that he got back, he got the most reception from these 2 niche companies. And actually, because of this cold outreach, he ended up with 50 early customers with signed letters of intent. So a letter of intent is basically a document, a non-binding document that says, if you create the service, I will buy it, or if you create this product, I will buy it. And that's pretty much as good as a sale. Not the same as a sale, but very, very promising. And 50 early customers, that's quite an accomplishment. So summarizing the pros and cons of the cold outreach approach is, first of all, it's quick to ship. So it's relatively quick to pull up a very quick prototype. A clickable prototype may take a little bit longer, but as I mentioned, it's relatively inexpensive to pay someone on Fiverr to create a really nice one for you that's clickable. Next, you get a lot of quantitative data based on this cold outreach. So the open rates, the response rates, the conversion rates, the click rates within the email. You can gather all these analytics to inform whether you're on the right track. And then there's also qualitative data, because as he was emailing these people, some of them would reply and he would start a conversation. And that at that point, he got a lot of qualitative data around what works. Finally, it's scalable, especially in the case of cold emails. And finally, it's easy to pivot. So you can start with one campaign with one sense of messaging and then test it and then iterate on the next one. So I usually recommend breaking up, let's say, a list of 200 leads into 50 or 100, 200 groups, and then you can test different messaging to see which cold outreach method works better for the messaging. The cons are some lead generation can be time consuming and expensive, depending on how complicated it is. You can get false negatives due to poor email copy or poor cold calling technique. So it takes some expertise to know how to write an effective cold email that hooks the reader in and delivers on the actual promise. And finally, you can also get some false negatives due to a poorly formed value proposition if that's what you're including in your email. So this is where experimentation is really key. So the last experiment that I want to show you is what I call the Inchworm Medley. And what that is, it's basically a collection of multiple lean experiments. And the first step is gauging interest for a product or service on social media, and then setting up pre-orders to validate the willingness to pay. The example I'll be showing you today is the Lean SEO course that was created by Pat Walls. He's the founder of Starter Story, an entrepreneurial community. So the first thing that he did was he gauged interest on his product idea through a tweet and a blog post. So if you can see the tweet here, he says, over the years, I built a unique strategy for SEO. This is how much traffic I got, 300,000 visitors a month. I don't really see this talked about. It requires the ability to code. Would this be valuable to you? For more, check out this blog post. And in the blog post, he just wrote a little more about, his strategy, why it works. And then he prompted people to respond to email him and give him some feedback on the idea. And what happened is he got a ton of feedback in his email. So, tons of qualitative feedback, tons of insights into the customer pain points, what people are trying to do with SEO that he could then use to further inform, should he continue working on this opportunity? And if he's going to continue working on it, is it viable? He then continued to leverage social media to gauge interest. This time he gauged the product format. So he was asking, I got a lot of emails, got a lot of positive reception. Should I be doing a course? Is there a better format? Is a course boring? And so as we can see, once again, just like his previous tweets, he got a ton of engagement, ton of comments, and probably more people emailing him about what the best format of the product would be. Step 4 is he decided to put up pre-orders in order to validate the willingness to pay. So you can see here in his tweet, he's very, very transparent on Twitter, by the way. Validation, I wanted to make sure people would pay for this. So before I actually started creating any of the course, I created a landing page, coded a checkout feature with Stripe to take pre-orders, and then set a firm launch date so that when people order the pre-order, they know exactly when they're going to get the product. And so just a small note here, he coded the checkout feature with Stripe on his website, but I just want to highlight that you don't need to code that necessarily. There are tools out there like Gumroad or ConvertKit Commerce where you can actually set up a landing page and for pre-orders of a digital product very, very easily without writing a single line of code. I've sold digital products on Gumroad myself and it works absolutely great, especially pre-orders as well. So the results of this combination of lean experiments that Pat Walls ran was within 2 weeks, he had $2,000 in pre-sales. So this is thanks to the pre-orders that he set up. And that was excellent validation for him to keep working on the course and know that he's going to deliver something that's valuable and more importantly, that people actually want to pay for. After he launched, within 2 months, he had $30 in sales. All thanks to these very lean methods that he used to slowly inform his way into validating that this was the right opportunity to go after. So wrapping up the Inchworm Medley approach, the pros and cons. So first advantage is there's multiple checkpoints of validation. And that's what I really love about his approach. At every step, let's say he's the very first tweet. Does anyone care about this? If he got really low engagement, maybe then he would have questioned whether he should continue working on this opportunity or not. So every step, there's a validation point. Second thing is it builds community. So anytime anyone is building in public, as we call it, which is very popular on Twitter, people love following the journey. People like to be involved in the co-creation of a product, and it just creates even more positive feedback around the product, which I think is great. Finally, there's also no need to create or source the product right away. As we saw, Pat Walls did not create the course until he set up pre-orders. And then finally, you also get a lot of quantitative and qualitative data for analysis. So quantitative data could be the engagements on social media, how many people are retweeting, the comments, the number of emails that he received. And then the qualitative data could be the responses in the emails, what the comments are actually saying on Twitter, and that all informs how to continue proceeding with this product idea. The disadvantages include the fact that it generally is a little more effective when you have an existing audience and credibility. So Pat Walls has over 12,000 followers on Twitter, and he also has credibility around SEO because he's built his business Starter Story off the back of SEO. So that gives him credibility to create this course. The second thing is it might be a little difficult to back out because of social reputation. Let's say you set up a product for pre-orders and you decide that you don't want to do it anymore. It might be a little hard to back out for some people, so something to be aware of. And then finally, there may be a risk for someone stealing your idea. I personally don't worry about this a lot because I think the benefits of sharing your idea and getting that feedback and getting that kind of community going around it far outweighs the risk of someone stealing your idea because it's all about execution. But some people, especially if they're working on something that's a little more stealthy, this may not be the right approach for you if you're worried that someone is going to do the same thing. So just a quick recap of the lean experiments that we covered today. So the Wizard of Oz method, fake door demand test, which is sort of the form of a landing page, cold outreach, and then the Inchworm medley, as I call it. So now that we've covered various types of lean experiments and seen them in action with real life examples, the last question is, when do you walk away from an idea? And it may sound like a cop-out, but it's very simple. It's whenever the pre-desired outcomes of your lean experiments are not met. So remember when I said, stay accountable to what you set out to test, you need to stick to that. You need to stay accountable to what you set out to test and what outcomes you deemed necessary to pass the experiment. So stay objective. It's extremely easy to get attached to your own idea and only see what you want to see. That's why it's critical to state before what results need to happen in order for you to continue working on the idea and then stick to that. And that's the value of lean expectations. Very rarely does ignoring the feedback and going with your gut work. Those are exceptions, and exceptions are rare. So the reason why I've been talking so much about these lean experiments is because they're just really important for a bigger reason. And the reason is that, basically what they do is they help with speed. So because they literally help you build the right thing faster by testing things quickly. The second piece is they're a source of learning. So failed experiments help you learn, and it's really important to use that to inform how you're going to continue working on an idea. And it's literally your job as a product manager to learn as quickly as possible so that you can use that data to build the right products. And finally, the problem with lean experiments, in my opinion, and why they're not run as much in a corporate setting is because failed experiments have a hidden ROI. And the reason is the benefits of a successful failed experiment are latent because they help you build the right product later. So when you have a failed experiment, it's really hard for us to value that work because it doesn't directly result in revenue opportunities. especially in a corporate setting, that can be really, really hard to swallow and continue doing lean experiments, knowing that the next experiment may not result in direct revenue or a product idea. But it's absolutely critical that we embrace failed experiments, because that's really the only way that we can build products faster, so that we can go from this to this. Products where people will actually use them. Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate you coming. That's the end of my talk, and I hope you really enjoyed it. I have a quick little survey at the end that would be great if you could fill out. You can just scan the QR code there. My socials are all here that you can feel free to follow me anywhere and contact me if you want to chat more about lean experiments. I've also placed the slides on the Excel events page. Hopefully you can access that. If you can't, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll gladly share the slides with you. And we're at 10:38, which I'm really happy about. So we have about 12 minutes left for questions. So I'll open up the floor.
Yeah, we've got, I'll give you I think the easy one first. Jennifer asked, what were the names of the payment processing tools you mentioned? One of them was Gumroad. What was the other one?
I think ConvertKit Commerce enables creators to sell digital products online. There's like Podia, I think, for digital products. There's quite a few options. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was the one you mentioned. Gordon asked, can you do these kinds of experiments with pricing models?
Excellent question. So there's an individual called Sam Dickey. I think he's in the UK. He produced this wonderful document where he showcases a bunch of different lean experiments that you can run for landing page experiments, and a lot of them actually test pricing. So there's a really famous example by Buffer. So Buffer, the way they validated their product was they did the landing page experiment where you have to click buy now, and once you click buy now, they then direct you to different pricing models, and they force you to pick the pricing model. Once you pick the pricing model, then you get a page saying you caught us when we're not ready yet. But that way they actually validated who's willing to pay and what level are they willing to pay at. And this is kind of the type of landing experiment I've recommended a lot of venture teams use when they're trying to test different pricing models. Just use different landing page experiments to see what people click on, and using the quantitative data, you can then inform what the best pricing strategy for you is. Hope that helps.
Is there one, and maybe it was the landing page kind of drop, but is that the one you would recommend if we were going to do lean experiments on pricing?
I would say so. I think landing page, yeah. You can also do interviews, although it gets really difficult to test pricing with interviews because people are really bad at saying what they're going to do in the future and what they might pay for in the future. So I usually like to use kind of proxy variables. For example, let's say I'm creating like a jiu-jitsu product. My question isn't how much do you spend, how much would you pay for this pair of pants that's a jiu-jitsu, pair of track pants or whatever, but how much do you spend monthly on jiu-jitsu in general to get an idea for their budget. So there's ways to kind of go around it in terms of a customer interview, but to me, a customer interview isn't necessarily a lean experiment because you can't necessarily do it very, very quickly. So I would usually recommend landing pages just because they're way more scalable and you can get more data for pricing stuff.
Super. Yeah, a bunch of questions actually. One, when do you stop experimenting? 2 weeks, 2 months?
Good question. Yeah. So it really depends on how you set up your hypothesis. So it depends also on the product and kind of the nature of your business. But when you're setting up your hypothesis, you have to decide how long you're going to run the experiment for. And it depends on how long it's going to take for you to get the right results. So maybe if you're running ads on a certain platform, you know that it's going to take a certain amount of time to get a certain number of impressions, and you want to test a certain number of impressions to see how many of those convert. So it really depends. But I think experiments that take probably longer than 2 months to run, I wouldn't really say they're lean. So I'd say anything from a couple days to a couple weeks, max 2 months. Yeah. But the key is stop experimenting when you've gotten enough data for you to decide, is this the outcome that you're expecting out of the experiment?
Yeah, and even that in itself can be iterative. You run the experiment, time box it, come out of it, realize you don't have enough data. That might be an indicator you need to keep going,
Exactly.
or maybe
Multiple
that's a
checkpoints.
sign itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my immediate response to that one was, when you stop experimenting from a product management perspective, kind of never. You're just constantly running experiments, right? So, yeah. Okay. Whitney asked, how can we learn more about lean experiments? Are there resources you can recommend to learn more? It's such a big topic, right?
Sure, yeah. There's actually, I don't know what the best way is for me to disseminate these resources to these people, but feel free to reach out to me directly if you want the specifics. But there's actually a really great book called The Real Startup Book by Chromatic with a K, and it's like a really long PDF book with just a ton of different experiments you can run. I also really like Sam Dickey's list of the different landing page experiments. If you want to email me or hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn, I'm more than happy to share those two resources with you.
Super. Yeah, I think the Chromatic page was one I kept coming across as I was researching these things. As you're going through them, they tend to have a lot of resources that covered a lot of things you talked through. Yeah, I shared in the chat. I shared the one on the difference between Concierge and Wizard of Oz. So there's a link to Chromatic in the chat. Let's see. This is from Ali. How can you do these kinds of experiments with products that require a lot of interactions from users? He has examples like fitness apps. How can you just create a simple landing page to validate the idea?
That's a really good question. So something that I want to kind of highlight, and it's a nuance with lean experiments, is that some of the ones that I mentioned, especially a landing page experiment, is an evaluative style of experiment as opposed to generative. So evaluative is when you're closer to the solution, you kind of want to test the reception of the solution, the willingness to pay. But if you're in the generative stage where you're kind of just trying to explore the problem space and see what would people even want a product to look like, then you start getting more into kind of customer discovery. And I think what you're describing with, trying to understand the interactions, if I'm understanding correctly, kind of sounds like you still want to understand how the product should behave. And at that point, I don't know that a landing page experiment is going to, it might kind of cut out a part of your discovery. So you might want to do some, either some customer discovery interviews to understand what people are doing, or even just something like ethnography, where you observe how people are living in their normal lives, or even digital ethnography, where you search on social media what people are talking about and what problems they're facing kind of in their natural habitat, and then get a sense of how they plan to interact with the product. But once you get to kind of closer to the solution stage where you want to validate, should I actually go out and build this, that's where a landing page experiment might work better. Or alternatively, you could also do some sort of a clickable prototype and then test that, post it in some channels and engage the reception, and then interview users about their experience around it.
Yeah, I think the landing page is one of the easier experiments to kind of understand under the lean umbrella, and so people tend to gravitate towards it. Like, oh, we'll do a lean test and we'll use a landing page. But it's great at sort of understanding whether there's interest, but it's never been a great option if you're trying to see if people get value out of it from. And I think that's where you were kind of leading to, like, yeah, you've got to get people interacting with something so they can kind of confirm at the end, yes, I would get value out of this. And maybe by extension, yes, I would pay for this. Yeah, great. I'm going to read one. This is longer. This is from Dave. I deeply appreciate the incredible logic of this approach. I'm not sure if he meant a specific one or just lean experiments in general. It can substantially reduce risk and protect investor capital. However, could it be said that it extinguishes the sometimes blind passion of pursuing relief for a community of customers who suffer from wicked pain? There's a lot to unpack on that one. I kind of wanted to read it out to you and see if it resonated, but you may need to connect with Dave directly.
I wonder whether this speaks to kind of like the founder gut thing where sometimes people just go based on gut. I'm not sure if I'm on the right page there, but I'm happy to connect with Dave Brown and discuss that further.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll look at the somehow.
And maybe this will be the last one. What do you do? Another one from Gordon. What do you do if you don't have a lot of user volume for statistical significance?
Good question. I think if you're running an experiment that requires you to have a lot of user volume, but you can't get that user volume, let's say the ads are too expensive or you just can't get that many people driving traffic to let's say, for example, a landing page or something, that might not be the right experiment to run. Or you can run it, but really take the results with a grain of salt, and you might have to pair it with a different lean experiment or some qualitative methods to try and gauge that interest a little further.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask you this one. It's maybe more your opinion question. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to this one, but a lot of product managers are in a mode of, I have a product and I have a roadmap and I add features and I've got problems to solve and I'm going to go through. But I've got, and maybe I've got an upcoming problem I think I need to solve. And I'm going to do an experiment of some sort, doesn't matter which one, to try to validate whether I should actually solve this. Do you have an opinion on how many people I should test that experiment on?
Good question. Yeah, I think it definitely depends on the product, whether it's, a consumer product, is it a B2B product, is it an enterprise product, like depending on the pricing, sort of a little bit. But typically they say a lot of kind of idea validation experts say that you need to, for example, interview at least 100 people to get really some good results around, like some good, reliable and scalable results. I would say it's closer to 50 perhaps, but I think you're going to need to talk to a fair amount of people, unless you're talking about, like I used to be in enterprise software and it's like one customer, would bring in so much revenue. Like over the lifetime of me being there, we only had 6 enterprise customers. So if I were to test something with 1 or 2 enterprise customers, that would usually be sufficient for me to know it's going to work for more enterprise customers. But I think the bigger the closer it is to a consumer product, the more you're actually going to have to test, maybe in the hundreds.
Okay, wow. Everybody always has a different number. That was a much bigger number than I thought you were going to say. I'm glad I asked. Okay, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer sometimes too, right? Sometimes one depends one is better than 0 kind of thing.
Yeah, but usually the more the better.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We're out of time. Thank you so much for doing that. This completely lived up to my expectations, which were pretty high coming into this. So thank you for doing that. I think we had good engagement. And again, I encourage everybody to connect with Lena online, whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter. She's doing a lot of great, amazing things that are inspiring. So I encourage you to do that. So
thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I think we're off to the giveaway session. So I'll see you in the next sessions coming up.
Thank you.
Thanks. You can just stop the broadcast link.